Hello, folks. This is your impeachment and economic update for the first. Uh, we actually had a former CIA director who came out and essentially said, "Thank God for the deep state." Um, that didn't lead to an immediate arrest is shocking to me. It wasn't implied either. It was blatantly stated that here we have people within our government that are not elected, that have the right, the authority, and even the duty to overthrow the decisions in foreign policy made by a sitting elected president of the United States, because those particular things that he wants to do don't comport with what these unelected cabal, these members of this cabal, have decided is what they think needs to happen. We actually had a testimony from one of the people that was on the call that said that there was nothing illegal that happened. And then we have another piece of testimony that strongly implies that we had somebody within the NSC, the National Security Council, attempt to modify the transcript. Now remember, folks, the testimony we got yesterday was that the transcript that was released in all material respects reflected the conversation. In other words, it's essentially what you got is released on the transcript is the conversation that took place. And yet we have another individual who testified that he tried to get into the system to modify what was in the transcript and was unable to do so because it had been moved to a more secure facility. So is this an implication that we have somebody who is a unelected official who tried to essentially frame the president of the United States with words he never said? That's what it sounds like to me. And by the way, does that not constitute effectively a takeover of the government by unelected people? If we went to the polls twice in 2008 and 2012, and we elected a black man to be president of the United States who quite arguably had zero in the way of actual chops to be in that position. It's an individual who had plenty of affiliation with people that were on the far lunatic fringe of the left of this country. He came into office arguably with a questionable pedigree as to whether or not he was even eligible. But 4 years later, and oh, by the way, then he bought the medical scam and conspiracies and restraint of trade and monopolists an extra few years by ramming the ACA down everyone's throats with the full complicity of a Congress that was entirely under his control until 2 years later. Well, that's fine, but then 4 years after that, with all of this out in the open, a knowledge of all these facts, the American people sent him back for another term. Whether you agree or disagree, and then pallets of cash, of course, go to Iran. There's all kinds of crazy things, fast and furious gun running to Mexican drug lords. But the fact of the matter is that the American people sent this man back to office after his first 4 years. I never said that he wasn't our president. I didn't believe he was eligible to run originally and still don't. However, the fact is that with all of that out in the open where everyone can see it, 4 years later, the people voted anyway and said, yep, here you go. All right. So that's fine. And nobody, by the way, tried to impeach him for ineligibility, nor for any of the other crazy things he did. Elections have consequences. That was one of his famous phrases, right? Well, apparently not so much when they go the other way. So the question becomes, have we reached the point where we no longer really have elections anymore, where they're basically show trials, where we go punch our ballots and we push our buttons and we mark our mark sense cards, but in the end, what policies the American people want enacted and elect leaders to promote and cause, if they do something completely down that road, right up that line, what we wanted them to do, and then somebody in this so-called deep state disagrees with that, they're just going to overrule it, and if necessary, they're going to find some way to impeach this person, throw him out of office because he implemented a policy they disagree with. Well, that means we have an autocratic government. We no longer elect a government. That's a show trial. It's no more realistic than the Russian ballots where Putin gets 95% of the vote, or Kim Jong Un won re-election today with 105% of the ballots. Well, yeah, because if you vote for anybody else, he shoots you. And oh, by the way, 105%. Yeah, it's just because you got to make sure that there's some people vote more than once, and that's important. So if we're there, folks, then tell me why it is that we bother with this charade of elections at all. Why? And by the way, if you disagree with that position, why are you still sitting in your chair listening to this instead of doing something about it? This is exactly the kind of thing, folks, that got 1776 going. We had a king who said, well, if you don't like it, that's just tough shit. Well, we kind of have that going on right now, don't we? And the interesting thing is that we even have people on the so-called right-hand side of the aisle that are lending legitimacy to this process and not saying, no, we're going to call up the people. The people are the final arbiter. They voted for a particular set of policies. You're not going to allow that to go into place. Well, guess what? It's going to happen anyway. Very interesting situation we have here. I don't think I like where it goes. This is a very serious thing, folks, and I think you should keep your ear to the ground on it. All right, let's talk economy for a couple minutes before I close this out for the day. Got the non-farm payroll report today. It was considerably stronger than expected. The interesting thing, though, is to be found in the insides, which was confirmed by the manufacturing ISM about an hour and a half later. And it shows that essentially the goods-producing part of our economy has stalled and is, in fact, in contraction. Now, there are those people who are going to try to claim that the GM strike was responsible for this, but that's not true. This is the third month in a row that ISM has been below 50. That is not a good thing. That has historically been a very good predictor of recession that has already begun. We'll see whether or not it holds up, but we saw confirmation of it today in that the manufacturing work week ticked down by about 0.2. And just to remind everybody, the importance of that is that a 1/10 of an hour change in work week is equivalent to about 300 to 350,000 employees. So that's 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 just mathematics. You have a 40-hour work week. You have this many million people working. So if you're looking at the equivalent in terms of what it means to the economy, in terms of economic output, in terms of GDP and everything else, the reality is that a couple of ticks in that average work week is a huge deal. And so when you start to see numbers like that, where you got a couple of ticks come off of that, you're looking at an impact from an economic perspective that's is very close to around 600,000 or 700,000 people. That is a huge drop, and essentially offsets all of the alleged gains that we got from the establishment survey. The household survey showed about that on the positive side. And again, this is normally a positive month on household survey, so that's not surprising. We'll see how this plays out. What I always like to say is that 1 month doesn't mean a lot until you sit up and 3 is a trend. So we've now had 3 months of ISM bad prints in a row on the manufacturing side. You need to make things, folks. And one final note, which goes back to this ticker I put up a couple of days ago. Everybody is loving the asset price increases that we got, including the ones we got this morning with stock prices going up. You need to understand something very clearly, and that's exactly backwards. You do not want asset prices to go up because it is assets that you use to make things, whether they be goods or services. If I am going to open a pure service operation, let's say a barber shop, okay, I cut hair, that's what I'm going to do. That is a pure service. There's no goods being provided. You come in because your hair is too long, I chop it off, and you pay me some money. All right. You want me, in order to be able to sell you haircuts at a reasonable price, you want either the rent or the cost of that building to be low, not high. You want the cost of those clippers, those assets that I have to buy in order to do that, low rather than high. All right? Not the other way around. And you say, well, but houses. No, folks. You want the other way around there, too. Think about this. If you have a $100,000 house and you get married, you want to have a couple of kids. Well, that house is probably not big enough in order to hold a couple of kids plus you. So you're going to have to buy a bigger house. So you say, well, I would need a $200,000 house. Okay, now that's in constant dollars, but that's not how it works. Let's say that your house value goes up in price by 50%. So now you have a $150,000 house. Hey, it's great. You made 50 grand, right? Well, no, actually it sucks because that $200,000 house went up in price by 50% too. It now costs $300,000. And instead of having to come up with an extra 100 grand in your mortgage, you need to come up with an extra 150. You just got screwed out of $50,000. Exactly who got benefited from this? And by the way, don't give me this nonsense about, well, I'll move and, whatever, I'm going to sell my house. Because unless you die, you still need a place to live, right? So if do I win if I'm going to downsize? Well, sure. Somebody in my sort of situation where I could buy a smaller house, I can pocket the difference because my house has gone up in value. The place I would replace it with has gone up in value. If it's gone up in equal percentage terms, then in raw dollars, I have more dollars. But the reality is that for most people, the only way that they quote-unquote win in a rising housing market is when they die. Well, at that point, who gives a damn? You're not alive anymore. The same thing's true for most assets, folks. When I ran MCS, one of the things I was really good at was identifying opportunities where I could pick up assets, whether it be rent on a building or whatever have you, at a very nice price. And that's one of the reasons that the company was as profitable and as successful as it was. In fact, it was one of the primary reasons, probably even more important than my ability or lack thereof. This is one of the things that you learn when you actually run a business. And unfortunately, most of the people in this country have no experience with this. You do not want asset prices to be high. I know everybody thinks stocks are great when they're high. Well, guess what? You got to sell them to somebody, and in order to sell them to somebody else has to have the money to buy them. It's the same thing with anything else. Until then, it's just a number on a piece of paper. Well, who's going to give you the money to buy them? And by the way, if you start cashing out and everybody else starts cashing out, what happens to price? Okay? You want productive assets to be inexpensive and readily available. And oh, by the way, productivity improvement, that is the advancements in technology and our standard of living, that's what's supposed to happen from those. All right, you take a look at the computer on your desk. A couple of years ago, that computer cost more money for the same capability. 20 years ago, you couldn't have bought that computer for any amount of money that any reasonable human being could amass. And yet, today, you can have them all you want. That's the magic of productivity. That's the magic of technology advancement. And yet, we have so many places, whether it be in healthcare, whether it be in education, whether it be in housing, where this just does not apply because we have monopolists and scammers that are out there that are screwing you blind. And you, the American public, sit there and lap it up like dogs thinking it's good. It's not. It's terrible. And in the context of things like education and healthcare, if we don't stop it, it's going to ruin the nation. I'm your ticker guy. And that's the way it is.